Hello, I'm Geraint Davis, MP for Swansea West. I'm sorry I can't be with you today to talk about climate change and the importance of it being in our national curriculum. But in essence, I spend, like you do, a lot of time thinking about climate change, and the latest projections that have been published in Nature magazine show that by 2030 we're going to hit the 1.5 degrees increase in temperature that's previously projected at being 2040. What this means is that we've got to act much more quickly to get down to zero carbon emissions than has been thought, which is 2050, in order to avoid irreversible climate change. And people need to understand in our schools and communities that this will mean flooding, be migration, be war, food shortages, loss of habitat, loss of species, lots of insects, which we obviously need to pollinate our plants to give us fruit and vegetables and healthy diets. So we are really talking about a human and environmental catastrophe on our doorsteps. So it's important people act. That's why I welcome the protests at school level and on the streets to urge government to do more quickly. Because some of the things that need to be done will be uncomfortable, if not painful. And if we don't do those things, we won't get the change that we all need and future generations will need for their very survival. It's important that at a local level, we understand in sort of bread and butter terms what this really means and how it's really relevant, and to understand how we all can act, but governments can act in particular to change systems to bring about change. And for me, that's meant bringing forward a number of individual private bills. That includes a clean air bill, as was mentioned behind. And the issue here is that in Britain, something like 64,000 people died prematurely from dirty, toxic air caused primarily by diesel pollution from cars, but also from other sources. And I'm pressing in a clean air bill that World Health Organization levels of 10 micrograms per cubic metre should be the limit that is permissible to have healthy air. Obviously, clean air can be measured on devices like this that could be used in people's schools, places of work, roadsides, to check what the levels are to help bring about pressure from the public to deliver changes that deliver cleaner air, and that might include incentives and opportunities for scrappage schemes to move people to electric cars and to stop so much urban congestion. I'm in Parliament at the moment. You can probably hear the ringing bell behind me, which is about voting on Brexit, and we're spending all our time in Britain talking about Brexit that in fact won't do our climate any good, because it'll mean that we have to export from further afield with a larger carbon footprint. People should be thinking about these issues and not distracted by thinking about Brexit alone. But if we do think about Brexit in the round, again, climate change comes in. What you're thinking about is the importance of education and climate change. And it's important to realise that the issue of climate change comes into all sorts of areas of study, whether it's transport, the economy, public health, the environment, and the all-embracing impact of these issues in terms of climate change is critical, that people know what's happening and how they can influence it. Young people today, like all people, need to think about how energy is generated, how we use energy, and whether we need to do the things we're currently doing, in particular in terms of transport, whether we can move to more carbon-friendly methods, whether it's electric rail that we've been fighting for in Swansea, or electric cars, or in fact increasing the price of air travel, in particular for frequent travellers, which is escalating in a completely unsustainable way, whether more people can work at home with the internet rather than travelling further and further afield on faster journeys to London. There seems an obsession with the need to travel relentlessly. 80% of the fossil fuels that have been identified cannot be exploited if we're to avoid irreversible climate change. And there's massive subsidy that continues to go into fossil fuels, much more than renewable energy. This is something that needs to be changed. Much of that subsidy, of course, goes into the production of plastics by the same manufacturers. And plastics are currently at a level that are killing 1 million birds every year, 100,000 mammals. And by 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the sea. And that's why I've pioneered this plastics bill. It's got widespread support, and I think people agree that we should use less plastic. But it is important to have a very radical approach to this, in my view, to tax all virgin plastic. So the cost of plastic simply goes up, and people are driven, both consumers and producers, to have viable alternatives. There's no necessity for everyone to continuously walk around with plastic bottles and cups and the like, and to have non-reusable plastic packaging on all foodstuffs. There are alternatives, and we need to seek those. Indeed, there are other issues like fracking that's important in the debate for climate sustainability. Fracking, in fact, ends up with 5% of the methane that's extracted through explosions, in essence, of high pressure water underground. Gives rise to about 5% of that methane is leaked. Now, methane is 85 times more powerful than carbon dioxide for climate change, and this means that fracking is up to twice as bad as coal for global warming. So there's no place in any country that's serious about tackling climate change for fracking, and it simply needs to be stopped, and people need to understand that. This is irrespective of the problems we have with localised water quality, earth tremors and air quality. And we do need to focus on the governments actually doing the right thing sooner rather than later. So all this information and knowledge needs to be fed through and discussed in the classroom, in the college, with a view that people understand the linkages between everything we do in climate change, not just as a matter of averting the problems of self-destruction, but as the opportunities for a green revolution for the future, opportunities for energy, for jobs, for skills, for young and old people alike. So when we look in Swansea, there's been some focus on the opportunities to use our waves, through lagoons or tidal barrages, in the case of the Severn barrage, to generate energy. We've thought about wind, and in England onshore wind is banned. Clearly that ban should not go ahead, because some NIMBYs are worried about windmills locally, when the alternative could be fracking or conventional fossil fuel. We need to think about solar. There's people who are keen on nuclear, and I agree there may be a case for nuclear in the mix, but the reality is that at the moment nuclear commands something like 2.5% of global output. If it went up to about 10%, we'd run out of uranium within 10 years. So again, it isn't sustainable in terms of the resources available, and it's got various problematic byproducts of radioactive waste. The biggest nuclear opportunity, of course, is the sun itself, which enable, if we harness the sun's power, certainly in a joined up way with poorer nations in Northern Africa, for example, networked into Southern Europe and through to Britain, through cooperation, we could have a more cooperative approach that provided a more sustainable solution that also actually gave money from the richer countries to the poorer developing countries. So there's lots to talk about, and it needs to be embedded in our curriculum and in how we think about the world, and look about opportunities for skills, for jobs, for enterprise, for export platforms for Britain into a green new future for our country. The Labour Party has been very much wanting to take a lead on this in ensuring that climate change is embedded in our national curriculum from from primary school upwards, so that people understand their responsibilities, but also the responsibilities of manufacturers and governments in doing the right pricing for sustainable lives, whether that includes insulating properties properly, in particular to curb poverty. People who spend too much money as it is on heating, they need proper insulation paid for by the state to help save our planet and save their pocket. But also, the public transport systems that we urgently need. It is the case, for example, in Wales, we've got 5% of the people, but get 1.5% of the investment. And we deserve a fairer share of green, modern, fast rail connectivity, and a Swansea metro is something people should be talking about, linking up bus and rail services across West Wales, enabling people to get to their work without having to rely on a car. We do need those sort of investments. In terms of public health, the problems of clean air from fossil fuel, which cause dementia, anxiety, mental health problems in young children and old people, alongside physical problems, whether it's heart attacks, lung disease, strokes. These are clear. Of course, air pollutants are the invisible killers that need to be tackled. And again, all this is coming from fossil fuel. And if we do provide cleaner, more healthy alternatives for the future, it is the case that we help to tackle climate change as well. So certainly the Labour Party approach is that climate change does represent a major threat that needs to be tackled aggressively now, but it represents a huge opportunity to show leadership within Europe and the rest of the world for exports, and to lead the way so we can share a more prosperous and united world together. I wish you well. I'm sorry I'm not with you, but please feel free to get in contact, and I'll continue as you will to try and build a cleaner, greener, more sustainable future for all. Thank you very much.